You are listening to Adventist Radio London. This is the Family Matters Show, and we are crazy about mental health. My name is Ruth Maxwell.
And I'm Brian Maxwell.
And on today's show, we have our very special guest, Sherri-Lee. Hi, Sherri-Lee.
Hello.
Welcome.
You?
And as usual on the show, we start with a word of prayer. So if we just take a moment to pray. Father, thank you for these few moments that we're going to spend with Sherri-Lee. And Lord, thank you for her life and her experience. And Lord, we pray that as she shares the experience of mental health or working in the mental health arena, that Father, somebody or at least one person may be encouraged to seek help if they need to, and that they may be strengthened if they need to find the strength. And Father, that ultimately everyone listening to this show may understand that God cares about our mental well-being. Amen.
Amen. Okay, so, Sherri-Lee, first of all, you're on the show because you're linked to this mental health arena. So tell me, what is the title of your job?
Okay, so in the UK, my job title would be a Psychotherapeutic Counsellor for Children and Adolescents. Oftentimes when I say that, I just get like a bit of a fuzzy look and people think but it's a really fancy way of just saying a child counsellor. I think in the UK at the time when they came up with that term, schools were not hiring psychotherapists, which psychotherapy requires you to do a lot more training and a lot more studying and a lot more clinical hours. Counselling, you can get a counselling diploma in a year. So psychotherapeutic counselling was like a midway point where it's more than counselling, slightly less than being psychotherapist, and it was done specifically for hiring purposes, but it's really a school counsellor. So I currently live in Doha, Qatar, and here I'm defined as a school counsellor.
Okay, so how did you get into this field? Tell us about your pathway, your journey.
Right, so I think growing up, I'm half Zimbabwean, half Mauritian, Seychelles. And that experience in itself meant that I had quite a unique upbringing and having kind of interactions with two different cultures at any given time, every day, family-wise. I traveled to the Seychelles to see my mom's family. I lived in Zimbabwe at the time. And then when I was 17, a week before I turned 18, I moved to the UK. So that experience just meant that I had a sense of marginalization. I was never someone that really fitted in. And I remember resenting that experience. But what I didn't realize is because I was somebody that, was not always able to fully fit in. When I moved to the UK, people would say, "Oh, you're not black, or you're Indian, or you just needed all these labels." And that experience just meant I had to stand back from a lot of things and observe. And a lot of my observations just meant I used to listen. I used to listen to a lot of people, and I used to listen to the way people would talk and how we form language and society and how we give meaning to things. But something I started to notice is that in my standing back to kind of assess my world all the time and the changing dynamic of it, I would just be listening a lot of the time and people would be talking. So throughout my life, I've been listening to people, before I even had the title psychotherapeutic counselor. And so I remember when I finished my A-levels, I was adamant I was going to be a lawyer, and I was like, right, I'm going to go and fight the cause for children all over the world, and that's what I'm going to do. And then I remember speaking to my parents, and, they were like, really? How? But because I was in the UK, it would have cost quite a lot of money to get my parents to fund me to go to university. To do my undergraduate, they would have had to pay, foreign fees, and it was just a lot. So I remember someone suggesting Newbold College, the Seventh-day Adventist University, and I was like, no way, I'm not doing it.
Where's that? Where's Newbold?
Newbold is in Berkshire, in England, which is about 15, 20 minutes from Reading. And Newbold College itself is in a little village called Binfield. It's tucked away nicely in a little village called Binfield. But if you use Reading as your point of reference, it's about 20 minutes from Reading. So when I looked in my mind, Newbold College was for pastors. That's where pastors went to go and study to become a pastor. And I was not becoming a pastor. I was adamant about it. I'm going to be a lawyer. Why are you trying to send me to Newbold? But at the time, it just meant that Newbold was cheaper because I was a foreign student. Newbold was actually cheaper for me to go to. And I remember my father saying, okay, well, if that's not something you want to consider, don't worry about it. But, just give it a look. And I was like, no. I mean, I'd already visited Warwick University. I'd looked into their courses. I'm like, that's where I'm going. Like, I don't care. This is what I'm doing. And like the fees, I think, were just astronomical. And I was like, how can I get my parents to pay for that? So I remember grudgingly like being mad at God and being like, no, I'm going to be a lawyer. And at that specific time, my mother's sister happened to be a lecturer at Newbold for a very brief time. And I hadn't really seen her for ages. And she said, why don't you just come and see what courses that they have?
Yeah.
Jumped on a train, lived in Northampton at the time, caught a train to London to Binfield. And I looked at the courses. Obviously, law was not there. Nothing stands out to me. But then I just was, remembering that my parents were doing all they can to, support my life here there in the UK. And so I kind of came up upon a subject called behavioral sciences. And I was like, what's that? I hadn't understood the term. And I started to read the blurb. And I mean, it was not anything to do with law, but there were things in there that I think started to resonate. I was like, okay. Yeah, and I started to go, okay. And then 2 weeks later, I had signed up for the course.
Wow.
I didn't even know how we were going to pay for this. I remember just calling my dad and saying, okay. I remember I just prayed and I said, all right, Lord, if you want me to do this, get me in. The term had started, induction had started. And yeah, I got in 2 weeks later. My aunt, it's like, you can live with me for the first few weeks. But she was moving back to the Seychelles. So I was like, oh, okay. Where am I going to live after you leave? And my dad, I remember him just saying, don't worry, let's pray about it. We'll make it work. The exchange rate with the currency in Zimbabwe and the UK was ridiculous. And so that sobered me up very quickly because I realized, I couldn't take this as just a joke, sacrificing for me to study. So I enrolled in behavioral sciences with not fully even understanding or knowing what it was. And I probably had one of the best experiences of my life at Newbold. It was a place that really defined me. It was a place that I came into like I stood directly in front of the things that I realized actually meant a lot to me, like relationships and people and social justice and societies and why we do things. And even though I thought I wanted to be a lawyer, what I realized I had always wanted to be was an advocate of some sort. Didn't quite know the term, and law seemed like the subject you didn't have to really do math in, and I was never great at math, so I was doing law. I started the course and I was so sure that I wanted to just finish the course quickly so my parents didn't have to pay for this. So I worked really hard and God put some great people in my life that just changed the trajectory of my life at the time I thought, but actually were just instrumental in directing me to the path I was going to. And one of the things that a lot of people, when I finished Newbold, said was, yeah, but, nobody really knows Newbold. It's not, the Oxfords and it's not the Warwicks of life, and will you be able to even get a job, and does your degree hold weight? And I remember being very discouraged by that, and I'm thinking, hold on, I just spent these last few years studying this thing, and you're telling me, then you kind of meet the first obstacles as you start to venture into your professional career and life. So I moved back home. My parents at that time moved to the UK, so that was great. I moved back the same month they moved to the country, and then began to work out how am I going to do this. I started to volunteer for a child's agency and really enjoyed working with children. I have always enjoyed working with children. And then eventually I got a job working as a learning support assistant at a school in Northampton. And that's where the real calling for counselling came. I was probably one of the only staff members of colour. I was the only Black staff member at the time. And I remember just being in these classes and a lot of children looking at me, like, looking up to me. And I was like, I'm still really young and I don't really have a great, life story to tell here. But the thing that stood out to me was one day, it was a time where Beyonce had just come out with this video, and some kids came up to me and they said, "Oh, Miss, can you do this dance?" And it was almost as if like the only thing that most kids wanted to know is, could I do like the dance moves in like popular videos? And I was like, no. I started to realize that a lot of these young girls, because it was a girls' school, were just looking for some kind of clarification. We're looking for my opinion on things, so I couldn't just talk off the cuff. They cared about what I was saying, and so the validity of my words weighed heavy on me at that time. And I remember deciding, okay, like I'm not just talking for me, like I have to really think about what I'm saying. And then before long, I just started, the school allowed me to run one of the after school clubs. And so I just had one room out of, one of the school's rooms there. And I remember just thinking, I don't have much to give to these girls at the time. But the one thing that I'm big on is time. Like I will give you my time. I might not have tons of money, expertise, whatever at that time, but I can give you my time and my attention and be solely focused on that. And then, but I just started to notice that more and more every day, more and more girls were coming into the room. And it was like, okay, first it was like 5 and then 10 and then 20. And before long, it was like a little niche after school that all girls from all different walks of life, from all backgrounds, were just coming into. And I remember one girl saying, "Miss, this is like a family." I remember thinking, yeah, you're right, it is. And that stuck with me. That this is like a family. And one of the things I started to do was tell the girls, we look out for each other here. When these girls leave the room, when you see them in the corridors, you look out for them then. And they all came from, they were different year groups, different ages, but time was all I had to give them. And so I invested in them through my time. Yeah. And then I went to India. I went to India to do some voluntary work at an orphanage in India with an organization called Save the Orphans, Please. It's an Adventist organization run by Kish Poddar, who used to be the deputy head of Watford, Stanborough School, sorry. And again, how I found that out last minute. At the time, I was kind of just searching. I had been made redundant at that time, and I was again questioning life and my calling. And I went to India, and I realized that the same issues that faced children in the UK, even though I was all the way halfway across the world, children in India were still kind of like following me and listening to me in those short little times. And again, all I had to give them was my time. I wasn't there for a long time. But I was like, okay, and then that's kind of when I remember standing at the orphanage, going out at one of the lunch breaks and just praying and being like, okay, Lord, I think you want me to do this thing with kids. And I know it's not law now, but I know it's time. Like, what thing can I do that invests time in children?
Yeah.
Immediately, I thought counselling or teaching. So those are the two ideas that came to my mind. When I came back into the UK, I started to look at counselling courses or teaching courses. Having worked in the school system, I take my hat off to teachers and believe they should be the highest paid.
Amen to that. I take my hat off to school teachers too. My wife is a teacher. They should be the highest paid individuals.
And actually, it's in Germany, they are. I was reading a post this week about, teachers. Angela Merkel pays teachers more than she pays judges and policemen. And I think the country was speaking about, why is that so? And I think she validated.
How is your German, Ruth?
Ein bisschen ist gut, yeah.
Yeah, she was just saying, how can I not pay the people that teach you to become who you are more? And I was just like, okay, teaching. But from the way teaching was in the UK, I was like, I don't know how teachers split themselves up into so many pieces for so many little children and have to deliver lessons and have to stick to targets and have to do reports and marking and have to deliver. It was just watching teachers. I was like, okay, it's not teaching. It's definitely not teaching. That is a specific kind of unique calling. So then I began to look at counselling. And the reason I liked counselling was the one-to-one element of it. I can give you one-to-one time, which again feeds into, I guess, one of my love languages, which is quality time. But it gave understanding to what I had been doing all along anyway. So then I started again. I went to Warwick. I looked at the University of Warwick, because that's the university I said
you're gonna get in.
So I just been looking, and I remember coming home and saying, "Oh, I think I want to do like a master's." And everyone looked at me like, "Okay." And at that time, my brother had just finished his degree, and you know, I've got some amazing parents that have been super supportive of our educational journeys. Like they prioritized us above and beyond. Like I could never ask for better parents when it comes to that. It's just been our biggest champions. So my brother had just finished his degree, and then Sherri-Lee comes home and she decides maybe she wants to do a master's. And I have these grand terms like, you know, so I'm going to do this and I'm going to do that. And I'm not always conscious of what I'm saying at the time, but I say things, and they're used to my ramblings and they're used to my statements. But I just, you know, that burden of like, I need to do something, and I can't stay as a learning support assistant at that time, and then being made redundant, not knowing what I'm doing. So I was like, okay, I'm just going to keep looking at the courses. And I probably looked at the courses for about 6 months. And then eventually I remember getting to a point where I was just mad at the world. I was like, listen, I don't understand where my life is going. So I was like, Lord, I came home and I remember being upset, and I was like, I'm just going to apply to these courses. So the first course obviously was Warwick. I applied, wrote out.
Well, as you do.
But keep in mind, I haven't spoken to anyone about how we're funding this, how, you know, what I'm doing with my life. This is me in my room by myself, left alone with a computer. And then the second university that comes up is the University of Cambridge. I remember just making that sound. I was like, rolled over it, left it. That day that I came home and I was mad and I needed to make a decision about something somewhere, I was like, you know what? I'm applying for the University of Cambridge because somebody has to get into Cambridge, and I don't see why I can't be that somebody.
Right.
That's right.
Again, having not discussed this with the soul, I sent it off and closed my laptop, went about my business. 2 weeks later, I got a response from Warwick and from Cambridge. And then I was like, oh, okay. Both had, you know, Warwick was like, yep, we are happy to accept you. We want to offer you a place if you want to come in for an interview on such and such a date. And I remember just like, yes, I got into Warwick. It's my university. And I started to work out, okay, how was I going to navigate driving to Coventry? You know, it's a 40-minute drive from Northampton, you know. And then I just didn't have peace about it for some reason. And then Cambridge got back to me and they said, oh, thank you for your application, but our intake is full and we haven't got, you know, any more spaces. If you'd like to apply again next year, that's fine. I was like, fine, okay. And so I was going to Warwick, and I just didn't have peace about Warwick. And I remember trying to say to God, but hold on, they let me in, like, and then out of the blue, I sent an email response back to the administrator at the time at the University of Cambridge, and I said, and I'll never forget, I don't even know who thinks they can say this in an email, but I did. And I said, okay, thank you very much for your response and taking the time to get back to me, but no worries about, you know, the class being full and intake being completed. This was between me and God. Like, that's what I put in the email. I said, this was between me and God. And, you know, if I needed to go get into Cambridge, I'd get in. She asked me for my number, and she said, she called me back and she said, you know what, Sherri-Lee, what happens is we put people on a waiting list. So, you know, I've put your name on the waiting list all the same, but you just have to, you know, again, try next year. Very polite lady, love. And I said, oh, don't worry, it's fine, because in my head I'm going to work. And left it at that. The following week, I remember I was volunteering somewhere, and we're not supposed to have our phones on, and I remember carrying my phone with me despite not being told not to, and, you know, just being a little bit of a rebel in that way. And on my lunch break, this phone rings, and I'm like, you know, when you're trying to like silence the phone, because I answered it quickly, and it was the administrator from Cambridge, and she said, Sherri-Lee, one person has pulled out of the course. by default I have to go to the waiting list, of which obviously I'm at the bottom of that list. But she said, but I'm calling you because we had spoken, and I wanted to find out, do you want to start this at Cambridge? And I'm going to Warwick. I really, that's. And I remember just hearing myself say, "Yes, I will." Okay, she's like, "Great." It was a Friday. She said, "You start next week, Tuesday."
What?
Does Sherri-Lee know where Cambridge is? No. Has Sherri been to Cambridge? No. Has Sherri discussed with anyone about Cambridge? No. So then now I have to go and face the people in my life.
That's right.
I remember getting off the phone and just being like, you know that thing when a child gets caught doing something like maybe sugar, and they shouldn't have been eating sugar or cookies, and it's that like, oh. So I'm like, okay. So I go home and I said, so and the intonation of my voice goes up. Just trying to soften the blow. So yeah, so like how I was gonna like apply and go to Warwick, and I wanted, and my mum, yeah. I said, yes, I got a call from Cambridge. Really? Yeah. And yeah, they said I can start next week. And Mum's like, oh, okay, that's really good. And then my mum looked up at me like, what? Like, and then I remember my dad, and my dad has this thing where he tries to multitask, where he tries to work and say he's listening to you. But he heard me, and I remember him looking at me, and there was just like the seriousness in his face. And I was like, oh, they're going to just be like, what is wrong with you, Sherri-Lee? Because obviously my parents are ride or die for us. And so me and my decisions affect them and their decisions in their life.
Yeah.
And it was a very selfish decision, And my dad said, go for it, Sherri-Lee.
Wow.
My dad's always been like this person that sees a mountain and says, let's get there. My mum is the opposite to my dad. She'll say, right, to climb this mountain, you're going to need this, and then she goes to find the things that you need to climb that mountain. So together, she'll do the logistics. My dad is just the dreamer, the believer, and he's got this faith that we're getting to the top of this mountain.
Does it sound familiar, really?
Well, yeah.
Yeah. This is all very interesting. I'm absolutely absorbed.
So yeah, they just supported me, and I remember jumping into my Ford Fiesta, and I drove to Cambridge on Tuesday, and I remember typing in Cambridge on Waze, and no Google Maps at the time, and just thinking, what are you doing? Like, why do you think you can do this? First of all, and I had that night before, I had emailed Warwick to say thank you, but I'm getting a decline. And when I drove to Cambridge that morning, I just remember talking to God and saying, wow, you really have a sense of humor, like you could have just told me. You didn't have to take me down the garden route. Like we could just have gone straight. And I remember arriving at the class and Satan almost trying to remind me that I was the last pick, that I was the wild card, that I was on the waiting list, and the class had already been chosen. And I just remember just saying, like, get thee behind me, Satan. Yeah. And I remember saying, I can do all things through Christ that strengthens me.
Amen.
I walked into that college, because Cambridge is divided into different colleges. I walked into that college, walked into the classroom, as if I was the first person that was chosen to go into that class and to do that course. Right. Inside, I'm fearful, fearful, but I just knew there was no way I had gotten me to Cambridge. I just knew that I didn't know how it was going to work, but I was going to go. So I did a certificate in counseling skills for 10 weeks, and that kind of assesses if they think you can actually, it's one thing to think you can want to come and be a counselor, but it's another thing to actually be one. So you do a 10-week course, and they assess you all throughout. And then after the 10-week course, I then passed that, and then we started doing the diploma. The diploma was a year. Well, more like 2, because you do it. You can only do it part-time. And then after that, I started doing the masters, and then so you do all the prerequisites first, and then you end up with the masters. And it was probably one of the most life-changing moments in my life, just in terms of my faith in God, and actually understanding that He hears and He cares about what is important to me. And all those days where I was listening to people and I didn't know what I was doing and I was giving time, he was gearing me up for this. Going into the actual degree, I had no understanding about. Again, in the same way I did my behavioral science degree, you just put things down, but you don't know the road that it's going to take you down. And a counseling degree is very different in that you leave most degrees with an academic qualification. Counseling degrees are not like that. You have to realize, I'm trained to work with children. So before I can even feel like I can go and work with children, what you have to do is work on you. You have to work on your issues, the things that have made you the way you are, your worldview. So in a way, a counselor that sits in front of you has had to go through counseling. So we had to do about 40 hours each academic year of our own personal counseling. So you can imagine you're studying theoretically and conceptually about this thing, and you're learning theories and all of that, and then start to practice on each other. So you all day you're just practicing, and then you then are going away and doing your own personal counseling on your own stuff. So it's these parallel processes that are just going on the whole entire time. And so you don't just leave like with an academic career. So what I'd say is it's not an easy course, and I don't think it's something you can flippantly decide to go into. It comes with a lot of responsibility and an emotional weight that maybe other academic courses might not. But it's a very rewarding experience if you stick through it. And one of the other ways in which I just knew that all along God was still in this journey with me is, little things like, when I had to find my counselor, I was in Northampton, and I remember thinking, oh, I really wish I could find a Seventh-day Adventist counselor that was like, and I wrote this down. I went to my prayer journal and I wrote this down. I want to find a Seventh-day Adventist counselor that was 15 minutes from me. And, you can find any counselor anywhere. And I remember the first counselor I had, she had to leave because due to some family issues. And the second counselor was a bit dubious, eventually had to go search for counselors. And I found this counselor and I was working with her, and she was a South African lady. And one day in my session, I was saying, because in devotion today I was doing this, and I remember she just kind of she did a little devotion, tell me more. And I was like, listen, you're not going to tell me about anything. This is what I believe. This is my faith. I was really defensive, and I came defended with whatever she was going to say. And she didn't say anything. And then she kept quiet for ages. And I saw her for 2 years, all throughout while I was studying. And only later found out that she was a Seventh-day Adventist counselor.
Wow.
That minutes from my house. And when I sat back and I was like, I didn't realize it at the time. But I was just like, Lord, you've been answering my prayers, and I just don't, we do this, we forget. That's the biggest thing we love to do. We forget, we say things, God shows up for us. We think he can show up for us in certain avenues, but other things we don't. And so we don't take certain things to him, or we do, and then we forget. And so, all throughout, he was just answering my prayers, and he was just answering my prayers. Up until the end of when I was doing my dissertation, I did a dissertation on third culture kids, which are children that grow up outside of their passport countries. So anyone that has a meaningful interaction with, so practically a lot of the children of immigrants that come to the UK, basically, first, second, third generation, anyone that has meaningful interactions with another culture that's outside of their own. And I remember doing this dissertation, and I had almost done 40,000 words at that time. And it was a week before I had to hand it in, and my supervisor, who had been with me all throughout, she came to me and she said, I just realized I had interviewed Zimbabwean kids coming into the UK, and that was the area, because I realized my dissertation was actually me addressing my own life story and my own life experience. I had interviewed Zimbabwean children assimilating into the UK and trying to navigate the education system. And a week before my dissertation is due, she said, I just realized your children that you've interviewed are not third culture kids. I was like, what? What do you mean? She just said, according to the definition. And I just remember thinking, Lord, this is what's going to make me a counselor. If I don't pass this, what was all of that about? And I remember calling Dr. Val Bernard Allen, my head of department from Newbold College. in behavioral sciences who became my mentor, my friend, and someone who has forever changed the trajectory of my life. And I called her in tears. And Val's a very busy woman. She answered and I said, Val, my supervisor just said, and I'm bored. I just, and she said, send me your dissertation. I sent it to her, and in 30 minutes, she called me back. She was in her lunch break at work. She called me back in 30 minutes and she said, get a pen. No, in fact, record me. And again, there was another woman just pouring into me. And Val is an academic. She's done considerably a lot of work. Her dissertation is on singleness in the Black community, and her dissertation is specifically about singleness in the Adventist church. So in my head, most people would think, why would you, go and speak to an academic that she's not a third culture kid specialist in any way. But one thing that Val does is she always chooses to give back into her community. She always chooses to pour back into people. And when I tell you, this woman, God has just blessed her with the ability to perceive and the insights and the experiences. And she said, right, go into the library this week. And she said, go and find. There was a lady by the name of Gayatri Spivak, and she was in India. She's like, you need to justify why you're calling your participants third culture kids. And I remember thinking, I'm going to fail this. And my supervisor said, well, I think you should just admit to him that you got to the end and realized that your children were not, third culture kids. And if they pass you, they pass you. And if they don't, they don't. And I just remember thinking, wow, man. But after speaking to Val, I did what she said. I went into the library and I didn't sleep that week. And I just read up on different things and submitted my dissertation and waited the 3 months. Just fearful that I was going to fail and that God had taken me all down this garden route to become a counselor and then literally was going to leave me at the last minute. And that is just how typical we are of when we just don't see or understand his plan. We just, hands up, we give up, And I remember the 1st of August, I got a call to say your results are out, please check your email. And I opened my email. I went upstairs. It was like maybe half an hour before Sabbath. It was Friday or something. Yeah, it was just before Sabbath, I think. And I opened my email and I read, and it said, congratulations, and I wrote a specific number. Pass mark for a distinction was 75 at that time. And I remember just writing it out in big bold letters and putting it up in front of me as I was working. I just put the number 75 because in my head I was like, that's a dream to me.
Yeah.
I looked at the pass mark. It was like, congratulations, you've got a distinction. And
Hallelujah.
75. And I was like, why did I write? What was I read the comments. The thing that they said, never have we really seen people submit things and then argue, because what I argued was like, who determines what a third culture kid, how is a third culture kid different from a refugee kid, from an expat kid, from a military child's kid, from a mission child, a pastor's child that's moved. Like my understanding is like, who gets to define your experience? You are somebody that came as an asylum seeker or as somebody that comes from, a well-off family as a cosmopolitan. Val spent those 30 minutes with me and was like, go and research this. And so up until then, I realized throughout the whole thing, God has had his hand on me. Like he was navigating me. I couldn't see it all the time. And so when I launched out to go and become this counselor, I was fearful at times, but I just remembered the Red Sea that I had, crossed so many times. And so I was like, okay, let's do this. And then I started to work for Children's Services. I worked in the family group meeting service, helping children that were potentially going to be removed from their homes, working with families to try and keep them there, as well as doing counselling. And slowly but surely, I started working with children again. And I remember this was my first love. Like I really loved working with kids, and that God had taken me all this journey and I didn't understand it, but I got to spend the time in a legitimate way. Like I was being paid to give time and spend time with children, helping them navigate through life. And that's been my experience even up until moving to Qatar 8 months ago.
Actually, let's take a break here, and then you can tell us about your experience moving to Qatar and what it is you're doing there. But this has been a different show for me, because I haven't felt I needed. I think this is the first time I'm actually breathing out, because I've been so absorbed in what you had to say. But we're going to take a little break now, and then come back to where you are right now and what it is you do.
You are listening to the Family Matters Show on Adventist Radio London.
You're listening to Adventist Radio London on the Family Matters Show, and this is Crazy About Mental Health. And today we have been speaking to Sherri-Lee, who's a psychotherapeutic counsellor for children and adolescents. And her story has just been phenomenal, amazing. And I mean, it's not finished, is it, Sherri? I mean, we're in the middle of it, or I mean, where are we now?
I think you may find we're in Qatar.
Okay, so now we're at Qatar.
So I moved to Qatar last November. After finishing university, I think I mentioned earlier, working for social services, and then going into the career of, being a counsellor for children. So the type of counselling that I did, so one thing that's really important to understand in trying to understand counselling, there's so many different kinds of counselling that exist. There's probably over 64 different types of counselling.
Wow.
So it's hard when you say counselling, it's not one generic umbrella term. Every counsellor has a specific theoretical model that they choose. So I am an integrative counsellor, meaning I don't focus on one type of counselling, mainly because children are different and you need to use different means and mediums to reach them. So you learn a little bit of everything, but the majority of my work is play, art, music, drama, and then just your core counselling skills. So as I was doing that in the UK, I was working for a couple of charities and some different schools. I was doing a lot of travelling, because the one thing with the counselling role is it's not necessarily a protected field in the UK. In England, sorry. So in Scotland and Ireland, counselling was more established, so they have a counsellor in all schools, throughout. In the UK, England, it's a little bit hit and miss. Some schools, if they buy into it, they will have it. The majority of schools that had counsellors were like in London kind of thing. So I did my placement for a while, place to be in London in a few schools. So I was at a school called Kensington Aldridge Academy for my placement, and that was the school that wrapped around Grenfell Tower. So I lived in Northampton, would go and do placement in London, and then waking up, the next morning and seeing it on the news. And that really, I'd say that really affected me as a new counsellor. You just come into this field and you're like, okay, you're here to help and you're ready to, branch out, and then something as catastrophic as that happens, and it just happened on 14th of June. So we're coming up to that date, and I remember just thinking, this is too much. I don't know if what I can offer is enough, and it is something that really defined me as a counsellor, because kids you saw the one day were literally on the news the next day. That really, I think, shook my foundations early on in my career. And I think one thing people have is a conception that counsellors can read your mind, counsellors can tell you exactly what's wrong on any given day, any little thing that happens to anyone's child. And so overnight you go from this person that can just, be a daughter, a friend, just somebody sitting next to you in church, to people looking at you for expertise.
Yeah.
And so there was a lot of that happening, and I remember just kind of feeling overwhelmed by it, because it's a massive field and there's so many different modalities that you can train in, and every modality is different. And so if I train, so I'm integratively trained, but if I sit next to somebody that is psychodynamically trained, which deals with the unconscious, or somebody that deals with solution focused and the here and now, we're all on 3 different pages, but we're all counselors doing a work. But one of the things that's key to all counseling is relationship. Like, it doesn't matter what modality you actually train in. The key to counseling is being able to establish a rapport and a relationship with the person in front of you. So I work with children from 5 to 18. And a lot of times, people will say, what could a 5-year-old, why does a 5-year-old need counseling? Or what would a 5-year-old tell you? And you'd be surprised how many 5-year-olds have stuff they're going through. Not everybody grows up in idyllic households. You find ways in which you can get children to communicate, and that's generally through play, through art, through music, just through time, again, taking time out. So I was doing that work. I eventually stopped the work in London, and I was just focusing in the Midlands area. So I worked in Peterborough, I worked in Northampton, I worked in Milton Keynes, and every day was just driving to different places. And then I got to a point where I was like, this is a lot. Like, I would drive, I'd leave home early and I'd get back home late. I'd stay up at night doing my report. So in terms of work-life balance, you're a counsellor that's trying to help people, but it's actually quite a draining field, as are most professional fields. So you have to really take care of yourself. So you're trying to learn how to do that. And I remember
sorry if I may interject. So how did you debrief at any point? Was there any downtime? Did you speak to somebody else? Did you carry on receiving counseling yourself?
Yeah, so you don't necessarily have to receive counseling, but I just chose to. I was like, in terms of my own well-being, like, I can't give out every hour. So I was seeing clients every hour, for 5 days a week. So I kept my own personal counseling going. So even though I passed like the mandatory hours we had to do, we didn't have to. And then counselors all have supervisors, so clinical supervisors that monitor your work. So those are 2 avenues that just help keep you in check. The counseling you're doing in the personal arena is to just make sure you're not bringing your stuff into the room.
Yeah.
So if you have a third culture kid that's half Mauritian, half Zimbabwean, you don't start going, oh yeah, I know that, because you deal with that in your own counseling. Yeah. Clinical supervision is just your supervisor helps, is just a set of eyes that's overlooking your work and is been in the work a lot longer than you have, is trained, has a clinical supervising license, so you can see things that you might not see so early on in the career. Points out your blind spot. So it's really important for counselors to have clinical supervisors, just so that you are not lone working all the time and you have somebody else's expertise in situations with you. And especially with regards to, a lot of the clients I was seeing, I was dealing a lot with child protection issues and kids, that would leave the room and you weren't sure if they were going to be alive the next day. There was so much of a lot of suicidal young people, and it really struck me just how many young people were just struggling, to just navigate life, so that's why it's really important for you to make sure you're looking after yourself, make sure you have your boundaries, because for you to be able to give and affect any change in your sessions with your children, you actually have to be in a good enough space. You can't come depleted. But what I started to notice is that because you also are new in the field, counseling, you have to do a lot of clinical hours voluntary just to get a certain level of qualification and then eventually accreditation, which is not like most degrees. Most degrees, you do your degree, you can get your job and you get paid, you're nice. But the counseling, you have to do a lot of clinical hours to prepare you, but that also takes a financial knock on you, because you've just spent all this money training in the field, and then you've got to do 2 years of almost voluntary hours. So oftentimes counseling is really available for people that have money and people can afford to pour into it. It's, what I found is it's not a field that has a lot of young people in it. While a few, I would say, I don't know, maybe about 10 years or so, you couldn't actually be a counselor in your 30s because you didn't have enough life experience. Whether now they're starting to recognize that people have different life experiences and you can bring that. It's an environment where a specific demographic of people go. So it tends to be, if you think of a counsellor, most times it will be a white middle class counsellor. You don't tend to get male counsellors. You don't tend to get minority counsellors. You don't, there's just, when I looked at it, I was very shocked at just how the lack of counsellors there were. So that was something that really stood out to me, because I just thought it's really important to have different groups in society represented. Yeah. So when I then decided, okay, I'd been working in all these different groups and charities and schools, the workload was intense, because the work it's just needed, it's necessary everywhere. But it was just really intense, and I had to really take a step back and think, okay, if I'm going to do this for the next, 50 years, how am I going to do this? Because this is a lot, and so I remember praying about it, and I'd finished a session, and I was like, Lord, this is a lot. This is a lot, and I do want to do this, but I just don't know how to manage trying to fit all the hours in so you can make the rent for that month, as well as give of yourself, because this is what I feel like. And at that time, I had just I'm somebody that likes traveling a lot, and I always thought of leaving the UK at some point and going here and coming back. And again, my family are very used to my ramblings. I'm like, I'm going to South Korea this year, and I'm moving. I'm always moving to somewhere. And they go, oh, okay, that's where we're going to today, or, that kind of thing. But I saw a job come up. I finished devotion. I remember just saying, Lord, I'm struggling, if I'm honest, and I can't act like I'm okay. And I need you to give me a break. I want to do this work, but I just need you to, I don't know how I'm going to do this, And after I finished worship, I was getting ready to leave, and I get job adverts that I signed up from The Guardian, and there was a job for Qatar. There was a job for Australia, there was a job for China, and there was a job for, I think, New Zealand. And again, in one of those moods where I just think I'm going to just apply for anything. It's like, I'm just doing it. Hadn't spoken to anybody yet again. I'm sure you can see the pattern here.
But just spoke to God.
Right. And I was like, Lord, please. And so I applied, and I just sent them off, and I just forgot about the applications. I didn't hear back, but I heard back from the Qatar job about 2 months later. Wow. So one thing I'm learning about being in this part of the world, it's teaching me a level of patience that I probably didn't know about when I lived in it's different here. And I'm learning to be like, okay, that's okay. Within the UK, I'll be like, I sent an application in. By 4 days later, I want to know what's the status. So I actually had forgotten about this job. And I was finishing a session, and I came to my car for something, and I just got an email saying, just to let you know, your interview is booked for tomorrow at such and such a time. And I remember thinking, oh, this must be spam. What interview? And then I recognized the name of the school, and it's an international school here in Qatar. And again, and then I was like, okay, haven't spoken to anyone. I emailed back. I said, sorry, I won't be able to make this date. I'm in sessions. Can we do another date? They agreed, set up this interview, and I had the interview. It was on a Sunday morning at 6 o'clock in the morning. And I was just honest with where I was at, why I wanted to move, why I got into the work. And then they were like, okay, great. Well, we've got a few more people to interview, and then we should hear back. You should hear back from us in the week. I didn't hear back from them for 4 weeks. Got on with work, and then I again was like, Lord, this is a lot. This workload, trying to balance it all. And then I remember being on a lunch break before one of my sessions, and I got a call from the lady that interviewed me, and she said, sorry, we were on our Eid break, so the school was closed for 2 of the weeks. I just need to know, are you still interested in this job? And I was like, yes, I am. Mm-hmm. The process took a lot longer to get out here because they didn't recognize my degree, my first degree, because it was American and I was in a British establishment. So it took long, and I think my church family knew. Every week I was like, but you're still here. And I'm like, yes, I know. I'm not going anywhere. Clearly you're just doing this thing again where are you teasing me? But what I realized is, it's funny, I think you said this to me, Brian, at one of our prayer meetings, that that God was preparing me. I was able to start working and take a break, like just stop for a while before coming out here. My brother had injured his leg and I was able to help him with that. Eventually, I left November the 9th, and I remember saying bye to my family. Getting to Qatar 7 hours later, and then it dawned on me that there's nobody I know that's waiting for me on the other side of this plane. I don't know if I could get hijacked. I don't know if this job actually exists. You know, you watch too many shows. I just stayed on the plane. And so everybody got off the plane, and eventually, a good half an hour later, the flight attendants came to check if I was okay, because I was the only person on the entire aircraft.
Seriously, Sherri-Lee?
I was scared. Like, I felt that God, you know, and I think that just shows us about our human nature. Like, God does things for us, and then, like I said earlier, we forget. And I was just like, I don't know if I can, what have I done? Like, oh my word. Eventually, I got off the aircraft and headed into this career path here in Qatar. So I'm setting up a counselling service here. And if you had told me in the UK that could you set up a counselling service, I probably would have laughed at you and said, not on your life. Like, I'm not doing that. But I'm setting up a counselling service for an international school that has 4,400 children in it. No counsellor never and hasn't had one. And I realized that, again, this is nothing to do with just me and thinking I can do things, but everything to do with God having his hand on me. And there's days this thing feels bigger than life itself. I just have to remember, and I have to remind myself who's been guiding me since.
Yeah.
Exactly.
That's
exactly.
it.
The same God of Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm sure they didn't have a clue either, and
No.
I'm sure they were overwhelmed at times.
Absolutely.
And they thought, this task, this station is way above me, but look what God did. You can do all things.
Amen.
Through Christ who gives you strength.
Amen. Amen.
So what does setting up this thing look like?
So it looks like writing up policies and procedures of what exactly counselling is. So, you know, a lot of the kids here don't actually even know what a counsellor is, and what does a counsellor do. Buying resources, budgeting for 2 years in advance, trying to make sure that the resources you buy have the right dyes in them, so you're not letting any child get an allergic reaction to something. Safeguarding policies, referral policies, trying to work out what agencies I can refer to. You know, like in England, you have CAMS and you have set up, but it's, you know, here it's the great thing here is, like, there's a platform here. Everything is new. Like, it's not an established career in a lot of ways. In Qatar, there's a lot of guidance counselors, which are American-based vocational counselors that talk about, you know, your career. But you know, I'm not a guidance counselor. So it's just trying to get people to understand what counseling, or the kind of counseling that I do, is, and just writing up all the paperwork, explaining everything, like things that the jargon that we use abroad that we just take for granted, and, you know, considering that, you know, English and Arabic is a language that is spoken here. So there's a lot of there are probably more hurdles here to kind of jump, as well as stigma with mental health. But again, whenever it feels too much, I just remember at the heart of what I do is I give people time, and I try and build relationships. You know, that's what God's been with me. Like, he's given me time throughout this whole journey, and has sustained me in my relationship with him. To be standing here in the middle of the desert, literally, setting up something that feels much bigger than me, but I just know that he's going to do it with me, and I know that I can do this because he brought me here. I'm out here doing one day at a time, I say the analogy, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time, and that's literally all I'm doing.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Exactly. That's if, of course, if you eat elephants. Just a question. Are you having to learn Arabic, or would that be something you'd consider?
I have tried to. I've looked up. So the only thing with Arabic, every Arabic country speaks their own version of Arabic. But when you go to Dubai, it's a different thing. If you go to Oman, it's a different thing. If you go to Kuwait. So I've just tried to learn a few words here. But it is something that is on my to-do list. Like, I do want to at least come away being able to just have a little bit of a conversation in Arabic.
Great.
Fantastic.
It's been amazing,
Okay.
hasn't it? It's been brilliant. Sherri-Lee, we just thank you so much for allowing us to have a glimpse of how God has not only given you these gifts and skills, but taken you on this journey as well. And we really hope that there's people out there who are inspired.
Yes, and actually this show, I mean, our tagline is that God cares about your mental well-being. And this show, if anything, if I can summarize, God has actually, correct me if I'm wrong, Sherri-Lee, but helped you almost reconcile your own mental well-being to suit you now to look after everybody else's mental well-being that is placed in your heart.
Yeah, and I think it's really important. I think he has done that. And I think one of the things we can do as a church and as people is to just help remove the stigma around mental health. Mental health is something we all have. It's how we look after ourselves.
Yes.
And one way we can start to do that is to invest in this area, invest in it as a church, invest in it as leadership, invest in it from pastors all the way to even having trained counselors. I know we do have Cornerstone in the UK, and they're doing, great work.
Job, yeah.
20 volunteer counselors, and it's not enough. And so, if anything, I think we could do a lot more. Oftentimes, behind this, we might say, God is our counselor, and I totally believe that. And we can sometimes hide behind issues by just hiding behind religiosity and just terms like "I'll pray for you." But when you can, when God asks us to be the hands and feet, his hands and feet here on earth, it basically means actually doing something about it. And so if your car breaks down, you take the car to a mechanic. And I think part of what we can start to do is start to talk openly and honestly as people in church about issues to do with mental health, and then create spaces, create jobs, create roles where we are actually showing that, we value this work. Whether it's for children, whether it's for families, whether it's for adults. And then we can hopefully then create spaces. And if anything, I would love the Adventist church to be leading in areas with mental health. A takeaway, I would say, if going forward, we could, just as a church, start to actually grapple and face this topic, because oftentimes people think it's not something that we can talk about. When you read Psalms, David keeps it real,
That's
and
right.
I think we should have spaces and platforms where we're offering counseling to everyone, like, in our churches, in our communities, and people can then remember us because this is where I went and I got help when I couldn't make it through.
Fantastic. That's an excellent way to end this show. Thank you for coming on to our show.
Yes.
Crazy About Mental Health on the Family Matters show for Adventist Radio London. I've been Brian Maxwell.
I'm Ruth Maxwell.
And we've had
Sherri-Lee
on the show. And just like we always end our show, just in case you didn't know it, God cares about your mental well-being.
Amen. Yes, I like that.
In this time of uncertainty, are you feeling tired, unable to sleep, confused, stressed, anxious, feeling alone, or scared, constant arguments at home, or you just need someone to talk to? CCS, your trusted counseling service, are here to help. Call our dedicated listening line 033 013 32495 or visit our website at www.ccscounseling.org.uk and chat with us online. We have listeners who can speak Portuguese, Spanish, Italian, Romanian, French, Tamil, and some other African languages. CCS, a shoulder you can lean on.